Strong Women podcast, we are going to be covering the topic of abortion and the pro-life movement. And if you've been a listener of our podcast for even a little while, you know that this is a topic that Sarah and I care deeply about. Not only personally for me, having an unplanned pregnancy in my own life when I was 17, but because as Christians, we know that the issue of protecting innocent human life is the justice issue of our time. There are lots of issues that concern justice, of course, that are worthy of our support and help. But in the hierarchy of issues, protecting the most innocent and vulnerable in our society is the highest calling we have. If you've listened to the podcast, you know we've featured stories of women like Catherine Wheeler, who was a doctor who formerly performed abortions, and Kathy Lesnoff, who worked for Planned Parenthood and assisted in abortion procedures. We talked to Megan Allman and Janique Stewart, who work for the Life Training Institute and speak to young people all over the country, educating them on what the central issue in the abortion debate is about. And we recently talked to Brittany Smith and Natasha Smith about their new book, Unplanned Grace, which tells the stories of women in these heartbreaking, difficult situations, and also helped us to know facts about what the abortion industry is really about, and also tells us the amazing work of crisis pregnancy centers all over the country who care for women and children. We interviewed a young friend of mine, Luella Moulton, who's 14 years old and is sharing her story of being adopted with lawmakers around the country to push them in their positions on abortion. So this is an issue that we cannot ignore or turn a blind eye to. And today, we have the honor of speaking with Lila Rose, who is the founder and president of Live Action, which is a media and news nonprofit that is dedicated to ending abortion and inspiring a culture that respects all human life. Lila speaks all over the world on these topics and recently came out with a new book entitled Fighting for Life: Becoming a Force for Change in a Wounded World. I love that title so much, Lila. And so we're going to talk to her about the book today. And just on a personal note, she's been married to her husband Joe for 3 years, and she has a 2-year-old little son, and she is 39 weeks pregnant with their second son. So by the time this interview airs, Lila will be holding her little one in her arms. And so, Lila, thank you for coming on the podcast and just helping us continue our conversation about the pro-life movement.
Thanks for having me on.
Lila, we like to start where you started. Tell us a little bit about your family. Were you raised in a Christian home?
Yes, so I'm from California. I'm one of 8 kids, so already that kind of flags I maybe Christian or more conservative family. And I was raised in a church, so my parents went to church every Sunday, and that was a big part of our life. Faith was a huge part of our life, is still a huge part of my family's life. And yeah, I credit my parents for giving me that initial understanding of God being a God of love, and then also that respect for life and the valuing of life.
Yeah, I love the story in the book that you share about how early actually this issue of abortion and the pro-life movement really started to affect you. And it was when you were little. Part of it was because you were in a big family, so you're seeing little siblings being born, you're seeing your mom pregnant and ultrasound pictures. But can you tell our audience about the story you shared in the book about when you realized this whole thing of abortion existed?
Sure. So, first off, because I have 5 younger brothers and sisters, there were ultrasound pictures that made it to the refrigerator. So, there was already this sense of life in the womb. And then, when I was around 9 years old, I found this book in my parents' house, which would be really instrumental for my sort of awareness on abortion. And it was kind of this old looking activism handbook on abortion. My grandmother volunteered at a pregnancy center, so I'd actually been involved at the pregnancy center to do their walk for life to raise money for an ultrasound machine. So I got the ultrasound part. I got the part about helping mothers and babies. I didn't really understand yet what abortion was. And so what ended up happening is I was very curious. I love to read. I opened this book. In the book, there's an insert, and there were these images of prenatal development, beautiful babies. And then there were also images of abortion victims. So you could actually see, and I saw, a 10-week-old baby. You can see arms and legs. You can see this tiny, newly forming little face who had been killed by a first trimester suction abortion. And I remember as a kid just being really deeply moved, sad, upset, wanting to understand more. These are all very natural responses for a kid to experience in response to learning about abortion. And I went and found my mom and, showed her the book and said, is this real? What's going on? What is this? And she said, it is, this is abortion. And it sort of set me off on this journey to learn more. I was already a really sensitive kid. I was already interested in a lot of, you could even say, human rights issues from a very early age, like learning about slavery and learning about injustices. And when I came to realize that there were at the time 3,000 abortions every day in America, and that this was legal, that this was accepted, that there was an abortion clinic literally 10, 15 miles from where I was living, growing up as a kid, it really just put it into sharp focus that this was a crisis and people were ignoring it. And I felt like I should try to do something about it, even though I was just beginning to learn about it and I didn't know what that thing would be yet.
Yeah, so what was that thing? You said, this is so wrong. It was tugging on your heart. What's the next thing?
Right. And that's, I mean, I think any of us when whether we're 9 years old or 39 years old, depending on our age, when we learn about something so awful and an injustice, a human rights abuse, we are just compelled, we're heartbroken, and then we're compelled we want to do something. And I talk about this a lot in my book, where that heartbreak was the first step to action. Even though you sometimes sort of get stuck, you might feel stuck in your heartbreak because you're just so concerned, you don't know what to do. So I started really simply. I started with just studying the issue. I read that book. I started doing internet research in my early teens. I started to discover, are there other pro life groups? There were no pro life youth organizations in all of San Jose, California. So I started to call other ones that existed nationally, and I found one in Central California. And I said, can somebody help me? I want to start a pro life youth group. And so, long story short, I ended up getting a group of friends together, and this guy from this hours away drove up to come and help us. So I just kind of tried stuff. I just experimented. I kept trying, and that was the beginning of live action.
Yeah, and I loved in the book how you talked about having heroes and how having heroes in our life can help us to have courage, which all the stories in your book of yeah, starting when you're so young, junior high, high school, then you go on to UCLA and have an impact there too, but I just kept thinking, "Oh man, she had so much courage," but I remembered how you talked about having these heroes, and a lot of them were in books that you had read growing up. And you said in the book, I love this quote about heroes, and I want you just to talk to us about why heroes are so important to have. But you said, choose your heroes intentionally and wisely. Study their lives, read their words, put into daily action their call to love others with the love of God. As the Ten Booms, Father Colby, Mother Mary, and Mother Teresa could attest, heroic love requires not merely our best, but our all. And you went on to say more, but can you talk about the heroes and how they helped you to have courage even at a young age?
hmm Of course. I mean, and so I mentioned heartbreak, and the first chapter of the book is Let Your Heart Break. And then there's a chapter, Find Your Heroes, because if we want to change the world, we need we need models. We need people that can show us through their witness, their example, how it's done. That can inspire us more than any battle plan or more than any thought process we go through, having people who've done it. And so for me as a teenager, I was really captivated by these heroes. I mean, Mother Teresa was one of them. She gave up her whole life to go to the slums of Calcutta, India to serve the poor. Another one was Maximilian Kolbe, St. Maximilian Kolbe, who literally was thrown in a concentration camp by the Nazis for He wasn't even Jewish, but it was just for being a Catholic priest who was trying to help the Jews. And then he actually gave his life up for another prisoner during roll call when they were about to pick 10 men to execute them as a punishment. One man was chosen and cried out in fear, and Maximilian Kolbe stepped forward and said, "Take me instead." And he was starved to death in a bunker in Auschwitz. And so when I would just learn about these heroes, it just gave me a vision for heroic love and for what was possible with God by loving God. And I wanted to love like that. I knew I didn't have it in me on my own, but I wanted to have that kind of bravery and love. And so really intentionally learning about my heroes, learning about how they had the power to love like that, and it was really through God and through practice, was hugely inspirational for me. And so I included that in the book because I think it's crucial for anybody. If anyone listening is like, how do I change the world? How do I find my calling? How do I live my mission? Stack up your heroes and study them because they will be uh, guides for you in your mission and essential guides to give you the inspiration and the moral clarity that we need.
Yeah, and I think that your story demonstrates something I just want to highlight for a minute. Frederick Buechner, I might be saying his name wrong, but he says, "The place God calls us is the place where our deep passions and the world's deep hunger meet." And one of the things that I just want to highlight about your story that we've already heard so far is that God put this heaviness on your heart, and then you took action, you learned from heroes. And so I think I just want to highlight that, maybe ask the question of our listeners, where is your heartache? Where is your deep passion? And maybe that's the place God has for you to step into. So that's just a little extra side note. Okay, so you dedicated the book to your sister, and Aaron and I both enjoyed how you were vulnerable in your story and talked about your own struggles, and but also just the dynamics of your family and things that happened that influenced and shaped you. But tell us a little bit why you dedicated the book to your sister.
Sure. So my sister Katerina, uh, amazing hero of mine, she gave me permission for me to include part of her story, and I prayed for her for years as a kid to have a sister because I'm in between five brothers. So when she was finally born, I was around, I think, 9 years old, and I was so over the moon. But as I got older, in my 20s, when Katerina was, a teen in her late teens, she was going through some really difficult things, some of which I actually went through in my teen years. But one of the things that happened to her as she was going through these difficult things, she at one point attempted to take her life and was just struggling with finding her purpose, struggling with mental health issues. She ends up experiencing an unexpected pregnancy. So she gets pregnant, and that was a hugely impactful moment for her, of course, as it would be for any girl. She was 19 years old, and I was the first person she told, which is a huge honor that she trusted me with that. And so I was in the drugstore bathroom, which is where we ended up with the pregnancy test, and it's positive, and I see the fear and the excitement on her face, which I think that combo exists for a lot of unexpected pregnancies for moms, for young women. And I just hugged her and I said, "Congratulations, I'm here for you. We're going to figure this out." And watching my sister choose life for her baby and having that baby, now my nephew, her son, having that baby change her life because all of a sudden things started to go into focus for her. She started to take better care of herself, get her better health for her mentally and physically, come back to her faith. I mean, watching it just radically change her life, the gift of this new life, my nephew, her baby, and even like to the point where she ends up marrying his dad. I mean, they had to work through a lot of things, but now they're happily married. They're actually expecting their third child. It was just an incredible testament for me that affirmed the power of our pro-life cause because these babies, the baby in my womb right now that I'm expecting next week, they change us. They strengthen us. They teach us. And my sister had the love and the sacrifice and the humility to accept the gift And she's a model for me and for anyone else, even in the hard circumstances that she was in at the time. And I think that's the core message of our movement and why I wanted to share her story in the book, because life is always a blessing. Like, life is always a gift, even when it's hard or confusing or unexpected. And in some ways, especially when it's hard or confusing and unexpected, because that's when the unexpected blessings happen. So that's why I shared it, and it's just very hopeful, because no matter what someone's going through, saying yes to life, another person's life, is also a yes again to your own life, and opens possibilities and opportunities that otherwise wouldn't have been possible. So that's the reason I dedicated fighting for life to Katerina.
Yeah, I know, and I love that you shared that story. I've, of course, known of your work, but to read your book and, yeah, read about your own humanity, like Sarah said, you're very honest in the book. But the story with your sister, I thought was just very precious, and I'm sure for you it was very clarifying I mean, you were already, you know, headlong into this pro-life movement at that time. You already had a big platform, and it seemed to me, and I'm sure it was, that it just clarified for you, this is why my work that I'm doing is so important, because there's girls all over the country that are taking these tests and they're scared, but there's good answers for what we can do. But I'm sure it just, if anything, just motivated you even more in your work.
Yeah, definitely. And also, it reminded me that every girl deserves to be celebrated. Every child deserves that. And I'm so grateful that I had the opportunity to be with my sister in that moment of decision where she's finding out she's pregnant, because I could celebrate her and that baby. But our culture is so anti-child, especially for an unexpected pregnancy, that girls are hearing the opposite. Have the abortion. You can't do this. You don't have what it takes. This is a burden, not a blessing. And it's so isolating and crippling for so many girls and women. And so it's also reminded me of what's at stake and how we need to be there for girls and women, no matter what their circumstances are, to encourage and to help them. And that's one of the reasons I'm so happy to be part of the pro-life movement. Is so much of our movement, as you ladies know, is those thousands of pregnancy resource centers and those in foster care and those doing adoptions, who are fighting, those serving, single moms and serving struggling small families, who are doing that daily work to celebrate life, and be there for mothers and their children.
Well, we know that some of our listeners are probably on the fence. Like, maybe they're trying to figure out their own position on abortion, or especially when it comes to the lie of, well, it's the compassionate thing for a woman in a bad situation. And one of my friends reached out to me when she realized that we were going to have this conversation with you, and she said, I really want her to respond to this, because when the Texas heartbeat law came out, she's in her 20s. So her friends were sending her memes. Her Christian friends were sending her memes. And a lot of them were kind of like, basically, if you're a man, you don't have a voice in this conversation. But the one that she said she specifically wanted me to ask you about, Lila, was this one by Ruth Bader Ginsburg. It's a quote. It wasn't a meme by her, but it was a meme of her. And it says, the decision whether or not to bear a child is central to a woman's life, to her well-being and dignity. It is a decision she must make for herself. When government controls that decision for her, she is being treated less than a fully adult human, responsible for her own choices. And that was Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And my friend said, how do I respond to a Christian who is saying that they don't think abortion is right, but they also feel like they can't say that and be compassionate?
Well, first of all, I agree with everything that Justice Ginsburg said in that quote. What did she say? The decision about whether or not to bear a child is integral to what it means to be a woman, basically, is what she's saying. And yeah, the government shouldn't be telling you when or how to have a baby. Completely agree. I mean, China has done that and other coercive regimes. The big disconnect is this: when you're pregnant, you're already bearing a child. You're already pregnant with a child. I think we have this fantasy in our discourse on abortion that you just sort of wish the baby away magically and it never existed with an abortion, but there was a baby that existed, a boy or a girl with a future that is a biological reality that needs time and nourishment to grow. So once the baby is born, in the sense that it exists, it's in your womb, then you have another human being to consider. And even if you don't feel like being pregnant that day, there's a human life dependent on you, and you and we have responsibility to each other. I mean, that's how societies work. We're not just out there in the wilderness by ourselves getting to do whatever we want, and we certainly don't have the right to go and kill somebody, which is what an abortion does. It's the intentional direct killing of an innocent child. So you can agree with what Justice Ginsburg is saying and saying, yeah, no one should tell you when or how to get pregnant, but once you're pregnant, there's another human life on the line, and you do not have the right as the parent to kill that baby. You do not, you have the right to, you actually have the responsibility to try to do everything you can to protect that life. That's a responsibility you have, even if you didn't ask for it. And in that situation, like situations where there was rape or sexual abuse or things like that, it's all the more reason why society should be supporting those women and helping them. But killing the child is never the solution. And so, as Christians, particularly who are anti murder, it's against the Ten Commandments, and you can be any religion and be against killing people, innocent people, right? Or have no religion and still believe that. But as Christians in particular, we understand that these are God's children. We are all God's children, and when He creates a new life, this is a sacred life. And so, all the more reason that we should be fighting for those lives.
I hope hearing that for some of our listeners, again, we know not everyone listening is going to agree, but I hope that answer that Lila just gave is at least a spark for you to think about it differently, because she just framed it in a way that's different than how the culture frames it for us. And Lila, I just wanted to ask with that. I mean, you talked about when you were young you started studying this, and obviously you've devoted your life to this work. So for our listeners, maybe no matter where they are on the issue, what do you think is a good place to start in studying this issue? Like, okay, that what Lila just said, that actually sounds true, but I'm not sure where to keep learning about that. So, what do you think? I mean, I would definitely recommend your book because it's your story, but you're also building a case. Um, but what do you think are some good resources that people can either watch or read or whatever?
Sure. Well, I would absolutely recommend people check out liveaction.org, our organization. We have, first of all, a resource page, which includes books that are awesome, that are particularly on apologetics, so the pro life case. I certainly get into that in Fighting for Life in my book too, but there's books that are just the apologetics angle. And liveaction.org also has our pro life replies videos, which are basically like an online training course for how to answer tough objections to the pro life position. And so it's called Pro Life Replies to Pro Choice Questions. So you can check that out too. But there's a lot of resources. That's the good news. There are answers to these questions. Take the time to look into it, because that'll really encourage you, literally give you courage when you're having conversations with friends or strangers alike on abortion.
Yeah, and I think the way you responded to the quote I read is one of the prime examples to model. Is just like you looked for, because words have meaning, and we got to define our terms. And so, in any conversation that we have with someone that is twisting words or misunderstanding, we can bring clarity by just saying, well, what do you mean by that? And bringing it back to the truth of things through defining terms is a good example too. So I'm glad to have this resource. I didn't know you guys had those videos. So, I mean, I have been to your site and read tons of articles, but it's good to know. You just have so many resources on the live action website. So, we just need to go park it there for a little bit.
One video that I love on your website, and listeners, we are going to link to live action. So if you're on a walk or doing something right now while you're listening, go to our show notes. It'll be linked. But I love, Lila, the conversations you guys have going out in the streets. You ask people what their position is on abortion. Then you show them a video of simply a doctor describing the procedure of abortion, which you quickly see, oh, they're actually pro-choice, but not, they don't even understand what abortion is or does. And those are such powerful videos, I think, because a lot of times people say, oh, there's no changing people's minds when it comes to this issue. We're just too heels in, deeply rooted. We're not going to change each other's mind. And those videos show how powerful giving people facts about what it really is and how that can change hearts and minds when it comes to this issue. And since you are on the forefront, of course, of this pro-life movement in our country, what do you think, what have you seen has been just the biggest difference in changing people's minds? I think those videos are so powerful, but are those videos it, or what have you seen has been, wow, this has really worked in helping people to change?
It's a great question, and I think you're absolutely right that there sometimes is this tendency to think it's all set. People are pro-life, pro-choice, they're not going to change, and we see change every single day. So live action, we're reaching about 15 million people weekly with pro-life content, and we see changes every day from people who said, I had no idea I was pro-choice and now I'm pro-life. I mean, it literally happens like that. And so, and some people are on a more, it takes them longer. It takes them time to sort of chip away at their sort of pro-choice mindset to become pro-life. But all that to say, two of the most powerful things that I have seen work the most effectively has been number one, what you mentioned, showing the abortion procedure. We have videos, the abortion procedure videos, it's abortionprocedures.com, and they're not gory, but they're medical animations of what happens during the most prevalent American abortion procedures, narrated by the experts themselves, by abortionists, former abortionists. And when people actually see, okay, this is a human being. I can see the humanity even in the embryonic stage. And then they watch how the abortion procedure destroys that life. It's incredibly moving for people. They're just shocked by it. And they think, wow, I didn't really think about abortion as an act of violence. I always thought of it as this like women's right, right? It didn't connect, the dots were not connected yet. So that's been hugely impactful. And then the other thing that's hugely impactful is stories, telling the stories of women who choose life and how it changes their life for the better, the stories of people in the abortion industry who quit and become pro-life, the stories of former abortionists who talk about what they witnessed by being abortionists, the stories of women who had abortions and regretted it bitterly. And those stories are also incredibly powerful in persuading people.
Okay, well, I wish we could keep going in our conversation, but we've come to the end of our time with you. One of the striking things about your story, Lila, is just how young you started, actually making an impact in the world around you. And we have a lot of young listeners, and so we would love to hear your advice for our young listeners. Of course, we would, all three of us would say, read her book. Okay, so that's a given. You should read Lila's book. But what else would you have to say?
I would say two things. First of all, really take time to figure out what you believe and why you believe it. Because I think we're kind of force fed, or we're just by osmosis, we accept the worldview of the people around us, which could be good or bad. And so take the time to own what you believe and have a strong moral compass that this is how I want to live my life. So that'd be the first thing. And the second thing I would say, at the end of the day, the most important thing is love. But love isn't a feeling. Love is a choice to want to do, to serve, to help other people for their good, and to want what's best for yourself. God, when we say God is love, God wills the good for the whole world, right? Creation is good. He made creation what it is. It's beautiful. And when he loves us, He loves us into existence. Existence is good. So take the time to really order your life by, how do I love God and receive his love? How do I love others in a really meaningful way and receive their love? How do I love myself the way God wants me to treat myself with dignity and respect? And I think if you have those two sort of guiding stars, north stars of really discovering what you believe and why you believe it, and seeking the truth in that sense, as well as seeking out love and God who is the ultimate love, then life is great. That no matter what happens, you are on the right path.
And I love that. It's truth and love together, which is, of course, a Christian view of love and life. It's truth and love together. Okay, Lila, last question that we love to ask all of our guests is, if you could have coffee or tea, sit down with a woman in history, any woman your choice, who would you choose?
Well, I talk about her in my book, definitely Mary, the mother of Jesus, because she literally mothered Jesus, had him in her womb. What was he like as a toddler? I mean, what was Jesus like as a toddler? And she was the one at the foot of the cross. They said a sword would pierce her heart. That was the prophecy over her. A sword will also pierce your heart. From Saint Simeon. What did that mean? What was that like to kind of bear some of the moral suffering that Jesus was experiencing? What the whole story, her whole life, it's very mysterious because the Bible only tells us teeny little bits, like the wedding feast at Cana, the birth of our Lord. But just talking to her, and she was also the most beautiful person. I mean, she had such a beautiful soul. So it would just be very cool, because she's my ultimate role model, to get to sit down with her.
Thank you so much, Lila, for spending this time with us. And we just loved your book, and I hope everybody goes and reads it. And we're so encouraged by your story.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on, ladies.